good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Since I Was Young, the podcast dedicated to all things Heart of Midlothian. This week we will be discussing the previous two fixtures, which obviously began with the visit of FC Heidenhiem to Tynecastle in the Europa Conference League, followed by a trip to Ibrox to take on a slightly off-colour Rangers side. Ultimately, unfortunately, things did not go our way in either of the two fixtures. However, we'll certainly dive into those as we go along this evening. As the observant amongst you can see, I'm delighted again this evening to be joined by John. His opinions and insights will be greatly appreciated as we try and eke some talking points out of two relatively average games of football in terms of a Hearts perspective, in terms of the results anyway. But yes, before we do so, please, as ever, I'll say it every single week, and you continue to show support, which is absolutely massively appreciated. Head down and hit subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can find all of our social links in the description. Also, on that, we have escaped the burning cesspit that is previously known as Twitter and have joined Blue Sky, the latest in the sort of Phoenix apps to rise from the absolute pile of garbage that Twitter has become. So you can find us on Blue Sky at SIWIPod, same handle as every other platform. So yes, we're trying to grow a little bit of a community over there and try and take some of the Hearts community along with us. It seems to be growing in numbers on the daily, which is fantastic. So yes, if you are new to Blue Sky, please do consider giving us a follow over there. It's a very nice and sunshiny place compared to, as I say, that absolute bin fire that has become Twitter. But yeah, anyway, we move on from that. But yes, as I say, all of our links are down in the description, so please do show your support. It's massively appreciated. And without further ado, I'm going to do the usual. How are you this evening, John?
Well, man, I'm currently sat here. It's been a bad week for Hearts when neither of us are wearing the colours of Heart of Midlothian, but I am currently sat here in colours that I'm quite frankly borderline embarrassed to still be wearing because my other football team is even worse than Hearts at their lowest this past week.
Oh.
Hearts at least are on the ascendancy generally. AS Roma, not quite so much.
Well, it'll be nice for you to talk about Hearts for a bit then. I think you and I do enough discussion about Roma and Arsenal away from podcasts, and I think between us we're
Yeah, it could be
kind of in a bit of a.
it could be an entire other podcast of its own.
It certainly could be. It certainly could be. But yeah, between us we've got plenty hard luck stories in terms of football at the moment, and obviously those kind of transformed into to Hearts. Sadly, I went along to the FC Heidenheim game. And like we spoke about it previously, I'm not going to say confident. I felt positive about the game. I felt like, we go into it, we have a goal, we see what happens. I think that's kind of the way I've looked at the Conference League so far this season in terms of, I continue to say it and it's maybe kind of belittling it a little bit. And I'll maybe change my tune if and when we get through into the knockout rounds. But it feels a bit of a novelty. It feels a bit of a free hit, a bit of a kind of bonus for us this season. And obviously it's due to the successes of last year. But with the domestic situation that we find ourselves in, even with a new manager and a slight change of fortune, it still feels a little bit out of place to have European competition. And it kind of feels a bit of a nuisance when you're trying to sort of build momentum in the league and you have to keep continuing with these midweek games. But going back to the Heidenheim game, I kind of went into it feeling relatively confident because I believed if we turn up, and obviously a full house at Tynecastle, there's something special about games under the lights at Tynecastle, and the atmosphere certainly gave that extra feeling. But Heidenheim, I wasn't too sure what to expect, to be honest with you. Overall, I'd obviously looked at them in the Bundesliga and kind of did a little bit of research for podcast purposes, and so that I look like I know what I'm talking about. I don't always, but sometimes I do. And yeah, I wasn't overly impressed with them, but I felt like our start to the game was very solid. But the thing that I kind of overlooked a little bit was the start for Jan Danda over on the right hand side, and Alan Forrest was over there as well. It was a very interesting way that Critchley set the team up to begin the game, and I think it worked very well, particularly off the start for us. So, pardon me.
Yeah, Alan, I would absolutely agree. We pressed pretty well, especially down that right flank. I think that Neil Critchley and his team had clearly identified the flanks as sort of an area where Heidenheim were quite strong, and so wanted to sort of overwhelm them in those areas of the pitch. I think that on both goals, we saw that that was the case, that he was quite correct to do so. I just feel like by
Yeah.
that point that they took the lead, we had run out of legs, which has been a problem recently. And to go back to what you're saying about the Conference League being slightly a bit of a novelty, especially with the situation we find ourselves in the league, I completely agree. And it's almost like a hindrance, almost in a way, because at no point since Critchley has been in, and he's been in a good few weeks now, have we had like more than 3 days off
Mm.
between games. He hasn't had a chance to have a full week, I don't think, yet of proper training with everyone in fit. He
Mhm.
hasn't really had a chance to embed his philosophy into the team yet. It's just been a kind of vocational learning experience for them where they've had to just wing it and hope that they can kind of pick it up as they go. Um, I felt that Forrest and Danda starting on the right hand side was a very surprising move. I felt that it was slightly confusing initially as to what he was trying to do there. When you saw it in practice for the first, especially the first 20 minutes, half an hour, it looked like a really solid idea. We were sort of pinning back what appeared to obviously be their main threats, which was their kind of their wide players. They have a lot of pace and a lot of strength out wide. So yeah, double up on the pressure, and it seemed to work. All that was missing once again, which has been the story all season, was the final product when we've managed to press them off the ball. Um, Overall, though, that first half it was very disappointing that we weren't able to get anything out of it because we were, I think, I would say we edged the first half. I felt like we were the better
Yeah.
team.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. I think, Shanklin had a chance quite early that he maybe should have done better, but I've lost count of the number of times I've said that so far this season.
Yeah,
But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. The width and the way that we pressed was fantastic. I thought James Penrice was outstanding, and I'll praise him a bit more as
yes.
we go. But yeah, the
And this was
game
my man of the
plan.
match for Hearts for sure.
Yeah. Oh no, I think you're right to suggest that. I think there was a few candidates for me that could have been given the man of the match award, and they gave it to Boateng in the stadium, which I think is justified. But I do think there were one or two
Yeah,
others that maybe slightly edged it a little bit more, and I think Penrice was definitely up there. But we started the game, like you said, incredibly well with the pressing and the energy that was obviously being transferred from the stands onto the pitch. And just on that, I thought the Heidenheim fans as well were absolutely brilliant. Their
yeah.
travelling support was amazing. At a little city of 50,000, it was just nice to see them. Obviously
Yeah.
make an atmosphere, and it added to
Yeah.
the
I think
the
about I think
game.
about a tenth of the workforce of the city of Heidenheim was in Tynecastle Stadium at midweek.
I think, yeah, I think that's kind of where I was going, but I kind of lost track of my words.
Yeah,
But yeah, they
yeah.
just they never
It was very
stopped the whole
impressive. They
game.
definitely deserve plaudits. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
they
that's
never.
what European nights should be like. It's harks back to the RFS game when we went there. They had very few fans in
Yeah,
the stands, but by God, they made a noise and they made it constantly. It was a great
yeah,
atmosphere, and that's what
definitely.
European competition should be.
Definitely, and I think what you say about it sort of being a hindrance and a bit of a novelty, we kind of agree on that. It may well be a novelty, but it is
Yeah,
an incredibly welcome money spinning novelty, which is kind of the way
for
I'm
sure.
looking at the Conference League at the moment. But yeah, we started really well. We pressed them. We made them constantly play the ball long, and it was working because Frankie Kent was just winning everything. Um, which was
Yeah.
great to see as well. I like I say, and as you said, I can't have any complaints from the first half. The only one being that we didn't take one of the many chances that we had. I think that was kind of
Mm.
the main sort of point to take away from that first 45. And I think I had said it to people that we were sitting with. We've seen this story before, sadly. But I felt like Heidenheim didn't really offer anything for me to be overly worried about, if that makes sense. Like I looked at the game and I thought the first 45 minutes, okay, it's 0-0, but we've been the better side. If we go out in the second half and do even a little bit of that again and just take a chance when it comes our way, then we can get something. And what what you say is absolutely spot on, and you've been saying it for weeks now about the legs and the lack of fitness, perhaps the lack of energy, perhaps is something that needs to be looked at by Critchley and his team, and I'm sure it will
Yeah.
be over the next couple of weeks. But yeah,
And I
we
think
we did.
if I can just butt in for a quick second, I think
Of
that
course.
that again, and we've beaten this horse to death since the summer. This all comes back to pre-season. And it all comes
Yep.
back to the piss poor way that the club was prepared for the new season ahead of August. We knew that we were going to be playing 2 times a week at least until Christmas, and they absolutely botched pre-season miraculously. I feel like
Yeah.
that inaction in the first 2 or 3 weeks of pre-season is what has undone us ever since. Because
Yeah.
during that time is when you should be getting the fitness levels up, and the match sharpness comes from playing friendlies, which they didn't
Mhm.
do.
No.
Both those things in combination mean that we are out of shape and we are not clinical. And I
Yeah.
believe that that's the direct consequence of the poor handling of pre-season this year. Certainly, individual errors keep biting us in the arse defensively, and inability on the part of the attackers to finish properly is
Yeah.
another massive factor as well. And it's like Critchley said when he came in, he identified it immediately. We need to do better in both boxes. We're doing
Yeah.
better in both boxes. We're not quite doing well enough in the attacking third.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think we've spoken about preseason enough. It feels like we bring it up every week, but it does, and it just highlights it, the fitness level, like you say, just doesn't appear to be there for what Critchley wants to do. Not that I'm advocating that he should change what he wants to do, because I think what he wants to do is the way to go. I think you could make a case and say, oh well, if he's not got the players capable of doing that, then why is he continuing to do that? But I don't subscribe to that. I think the players need to get used to this, because that's what it's going to be. Critchley wants to play that high pressing football, and we're seeing it, and we're seeing that it's working. And like I say, it worked in the first 45 minutes against Heidenheim, but the players just ran themselves into the ground. I think I've already mentioned them, but Alan Forrest for me was another one that would have been on the man of the match awards somewhere. That's just from me, because I don't need to explain. But yeah,
Forrest put in a
he
hell of a shift once again, though. I feel like
he
I've
did.
mentioned before how much he rises to the occasion in European games. Um,
Yeah,
on the big nights in midweek, he tends to shine the most. It's
yeah,
just it's a great arena for his skill set. He's a guy who runs about, he's energetic. Um,
hmm
the only thing that he's missing is the support, really, because I
yeah,
felt like Jan Danda, so he sort of vanished out of the game at one point, and just I think we'll probably touch on a bit more in depth on Danda later
hmm
on in the show tonight. But I felt that he, after quite a positive first 15 minutes or so, he's very, very rapidly kind of dropped out of the game. And it's almost like he just wasn't up to the pace. He wasn't up to being able to sustain the pace, and to the
hmm
same degree that certainly Alan Forrest was and our midfielders were. Um,
yeah,
he wasn't the only one, though. I felt that Adam Forrester was poor. He certainly was caught out of position ahead of the first Heidenheim goal
yeah,
on 57 minutes, and I felt like he never really recovered from that. I think he actually came off not too long after that and was replaced
yeah,
by Oyegoke, at which point
hmm
they just switched wings.
yeah,
And to be
yeah.
fair to them, their second goal was an absolutely killer cross, and the header was pinpoint. There was nothing anyone was going to be able to do with that second header.
Yeah, no, and I think the first goal was scored by that Conte, who was a threat for most of the game. To be honest, when he got the ball, he looked like he was sort of quite pacey, and he looked as if he wanted to get forward. But that is where I kind of wanted to praise James Penrice, and I think he kept him quiet for the most part of the game, and it was just unfortunate that just slightly caught out, as you say, for the first goal. But yeah, like I'll just touch on Penrice. That I think he's a fantastic defender, and I had this conversation with someone not too long ago. When Hearts decided to allow Alex Cochrane to leave in the summer, I was concerned because I felt like he had been a big part of that side of our team, but he did, and we spoke about this privately as well, and I'm sure I've spoken to you and on multiple episodes about this, that he always had a little defensive blunder in him. He always had a little mishap, or a little red card, or a little daft yellow, or
Yeah.
he always had something that you just weren't quite
Aye.
sure. And I'm not saying that James Penrice is the finished article, far from it, but I think the club have done very, very well in getting James Penrice in, because I think he has very similar attributes to Alex Cochrane, and it's
Yeah.
not meant that the transition from one to the other is difficult. You could maybe say that James Penrice is maybe slightly more defensive than Alex Cochrane, but then Penrice, when he gets forward, he knows where he needs to be, and he's deliveries into the box, and his cutbacks and things. He laid a few into the box in the game against Heidenheim, and he was actually unlucky not to score one himself as well. So he's got something about him, and I think he's kind of embracing that step, that step up from Livingston to Hearts, and he's proven that he deserves to be there. There was a an article that Barry Anderson, I'm sure it was Barry Anderson, in the Evening News. It was an interview with Penrice, and he'd spoken about interest from other clubs prior to signing for Hearts, and I think even Rangers were perhaps muted as a potential destination for him, but he was always kind of sold on coming to Hearts because he basically kind of knew I'll probably play there, because I wonder and I imagine they probably said to him, look, there probably will likely be a move for Alex Cochrane, so it's your position if you want it, kind of thing. And I think that's probably sold him on a move to Hearts. And I really, really enjoy watching him play. And I don't, it's again, like I say, I'm not going to say that he is better than Alex Cochrane, but I certainly think he appears to be more consistent, shall we say. And I've not noticed any major defensive frailties as well, which is something that when Cochrane made a mistake, you kind of knew something was going to happen as a result of that, be it a penalty given away, be it a free kick, be it a red card, or be it a goal for the opposition. I think Penrice just appears to be a little bit more consistent. Maybe, you know, I'm a big fan, and it's not because he wears my number on his back either. But I think he is certainly a very stable replacement for Alex Cochrane, and it's not like I say when we sold Alex Cochrane to Birmingham in the summer, I was a little bit worried, but James Penrice is making me not miss him, and I think that is the biggest compliment that I can pay him.
Yeah, I mean, as with any situation, we're not playing in Champions League finals. We're not going to, fire 80 million euros at a complete wing back. It's just not going to happen at our level. When we make any kind of move like that, there's going to be a trade-off. We're going to look for a player who has a set of skills that we feel can complement our system. Um, Certainly, Cochrane had a lot of flair. He was a very technical player, particularly in the attack. He had his defensive frailties. He had moments where he would lack composure under pressure, and that led to poorly timed fouls. The odd oopsie professional foul that would end in a red card or and potentially a penalty, or certainly would leave Hearts in a vulnerable position once or twice, or 3 or 4 times. Um, so with Cochrane's flair and attacking prowess, he wasn't a terrible defender by any stretch. I think that
No,
he'll go on to have a great career, and it's worth also mentioning he is a good few years younger than James Penrice. And what
yeah,
James Penrice I think has over Cochrane is that composure and that experience, and he is a more defensive player in the sense that he has a more defensive mindset, but he also just has better defensive awareness. And he certainly is more than serviceable going forward. He is a decent Scottish wingback. He's certainly, I think, would get into any top six sides starting lineup outside of the old firm.
yeah,
Um, and potentially would even get into the Rangers team these days because they're not exactly great in that regard. But yeah, I feel like Penrice has really come in. Penrice for a start has probably come in expecting to be a rotation option and fighting for a place for the most part. Especially when Salazar came in, he's probably been thinking, right, okay, so I'm going to be like a rotation guy, and I'm going to be the guy that's going to sort of push him and try and get some minutes in the kind of midweek games and rotate. It's not really how it's worked out. Penrice has very quickly become our go-to left back. He
yeah,
certainly rotates out with Kingsley from time to time. Occasionally, Rolls will end up at left back later in games when Penrice goes off or whatever. But he's sort of the guy at left back, and he has risen to that. And I mentioned Kingsley. It's almost similar to Kingsley in the Championship season in 2020-21. He came in. We didn't really know what to expect from him. He'd been at Falkirk. We didn't know if he was going to be Hearts quality initially. He more than proved himself at this level. He was probably one of our standout players in the Championship. The following season was one of the key reasons that we ended up in the Scottish Cup final. Um,
yeah,
and so we have been quite spoiled, I think, at left back for the past few years. We've had Kingsley Cochrane, like we say, he was overall a very talented player, a young guy who's going to go on and have a good career. We got a really good fee for him, and now we've got Penrice, who's just a very solid left back. He doesn't shy away from the tackle as well. He's very gritty.
yeah,
He's got that grit that we expect to see in a fullback at this level. Just
yeah.
a fantastic addition to the Hearts team and a pleasant surprise, I think, on a lot of levels because, as you say, he has made a step up, but he's got the mentality of an experienced player and that he is ready to engage that battle. He's ready to make that step up and engage the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it just shows that I know, like, obviously there was some talk about the recruitment in the summer in certain areas that we didn't get right, in certain areas that we didn't do, and we'll obviously dive into that
Yes.
as we go
Oh yeah.
along,
I
no
mean,
doubt.
certainly yeah. Oh aye.
But
We've gotten
yeah,
some things wrong.
but
I'm
yeah,
sure.
as far as left back goes, we've done well on that one. But
Yes.
going sort of back to the
Well,
game, we had,
almost.
well, yeah.
Salazar hasn't exactly proven to be the biggest, although he's young. It could still work out, but I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean that's only a loan as well, so we don't know what's going to happen with
Yeah,
that. But going back to the sort
he'll
of
be up
the
the road in
game,
January probably.
yeah, who knows? I wouldn't be surprised. But going back to the game, when we
Yeah,
went 1-0 down, there was that sort of element, particularly in the stadium. I felt it, the kind of deflated atmosphere, and it was like, right, we've gone 1-0 down. There was obviously the pockets of fans that were trying to, rile the players up again and get them going again because we'd still seen enough to say, right, do you know what, the game's not done at 1-0. Like this game's not done at 1-0. We can get at them. But it just never really came. And I think, like you say, the fitness and the legs is a big part of that. But we did have some opportunities. The Frankie Kent header, he's got to put it away for me. And I've said this a few times again on this and privately. If Frankie Kent was as good in the opposition box as he is in our own box, we'd have the
yeah,
solution to Lawrence Shanklin's goal scoring drought
yeah.
right at our centre
He'd
back
be the new Kevin
situation.
Kyle.
Oh yeah, and it's I've never known a defender. I've never known a player to be so good at defending the box and not at the other end. It's almost like he's just got. I don't know. I honestly don't know. And but the thing is, as well, he gets himself into positions where he can put the ball in, and it was a chance it had to go in. And if it had gone in, then it's a different game, and we're back in at 1-1. But then, like you say, the game was taken away from us with the second goal in the 89th minute. It was I was it's funny, to kind of try and sort of wrap up the Heidenheim game. I felt disappointed, but and I'm sure I messaged you about it and a few others as well. That to me, like I say, this Europa League, yeah, this Europa Conference League campaign is a bit of a bonus. It is a bit of a, as I say, a money spinning bonus. There was an element of frustration because we didn't take the chances that we should have in the game. But in terms of the context of qualification, yes, you want to get it secured as early as you can. And if we'd won against Heidenheim, you're looking at it going 9 points. We're pretty much there, at least in the playoff. You want to get that done as early as possible. And Andrew McKinley kind of stated as such in his quarterly interview that he gave a couple of weeks ago. You want to get it done as early as you can so that you can maybe switch off a little bit from it and focus again back on domestic fixtures. But thankfully, it's not the nail in the coffin that it could be, or it could have been had the other previous results not been as good as they were. So, from a qualification standpoint, we're still very much on course to qualify. I saw something on X earlier on where it was the percentage chances of teams to qualify, and I think Hearts were 81% or something. It was calculated by some supercomputer or whatever. So, we're going to be at least in the playoff, I would suggest, and that is a very very nice place to be. Obviously, two difficult away games to come with Bruges and Copenhagen, both away from home, so they'll be slightly harder, I would suggest, and probably the two sort of trickiest ties that we're going to come up against. But we'll wait and see what happens with those and kind of take it in our stride, I'm sure.
Yeah. To be honest, heading into the Heidenheim game, I was optimistic. I wasn't quite as confident as you were. I kind of felt like I would take a point, and I felt like we certainly could have gotten one. And after the game, I'm kind of frustrated in the sense that we probably should have, if we had only been able to put one of those away. Like, because I feel like if we had equalised, that would have changed the flow of the game completely. I highly doubt that they end up scoring that second. I feel like by that point, Heidenheim would have probably been happy with a point at
Yeah,
Tynecastle because they did get a bit of a scare in that first half. Ultimately, both of their goals were sort of sucker punches. The first
yeah,
one was, as I say, it was a bit of an error on our part defensively, and you can't really be too mad at Adam Forrester, who's right back, because he is a young boy and he's been run off his feet Like, I don't know that I've seen another baptism of fire that's quite like this. Maybe since the 2013-14 season, when half the team pretty much were left in that position by circumstances. Um, and then obviously their second goal kind of comes out of nothing as well. And by that point, it was pretty much over, and Hearts were essentially knackered. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I was
I think.
slightly frustrated not to get a point from the Heidenheim game because I certainly don't expect us to get anything from either Bruges or Copenhagen. Particularly Copenhagen is going to be a very difficult game. We do have one other game against the Petro Cup, I believe,
Yeah.
which we should be winning ultimately. I think that's the one that we should be aiming for and saying, right, if we can get 3 points from that, that's at least 9 points that we're going to be going away with. And then we're looking at potentially at least the playoff, which for just for purely a financial standpoint would be absolutely fantastic for Hearts. Um, so yeah, like certainly reasons to be cheerful on the European front, I think, even with the 2-0 loss, because it was by no means a collapse. We were by no means crap. We played a solid game of football from start to pretty much start to finish. It was just, again, the legs and the lack of a finishing product.
Yeah.
Ultimately, yeah, like Heidenheim, they had a delivery and a final product, and we didn't on the night.
Yeah.
That's what it
Yeah.
comes
And
down
they.
to. Fine margins,
Yeah, and
which
they
has
they
been the
played
theme of the
it.
week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. They played it perfectly. They certainly sat in and allowed us to kind of run ourselves into the ground, and then took advantage when we didn't have the legs, which is, you're going to come up against that when you come up against sides in Europe that
Yeah.
have that nous and being able to kind of suss out a game. But yeah, it was disappointing end result. But as I said, qualification was not overly affected, so that kind of puts some positive spin on it. Before we dive into the Rangers game, the visit to Ibrox, I wanted to open the Jan Danda conversation because obviously we spoke about it, we touched on it briefly earlier. Now, this is my view, and as I say, I'm sure there will be people that will disagree. In fact, I know there are people that disagree with me because I opened it up to conversation, which we'll run through ourselves. But yeah, I like him, and I think maybe he's been a victim of the system, a victim of the change in sort of mentality, if you will, with Critchley coming in and being that sort of pressing front foot sort of football. I don't know whether Danda has that in him, and I'm not suggesting for a moment he can't do it. But I watched him against Heidenheim, and he, like you said, he sort of faded out the game, and he became that player that was passing backwards rather than looking for a forward pass, rather than looking for that option to try and do something, to create something. And that was even early in the game as well. There were a few moments, don't get me wrong, where, like we said earlier, the doubling up on the right hand side with Alan Forrest worked well, but Heidenheim, to their credit, changed their system in the second half, and a few of our players kind of faded out of the game, and Danda was certainly one of them. I like him as a player. I do. I think he's got a little bit about him, but I think maybe, and maybe this is me, and maybe this is my own error in my own ways, but I think I perhaps set the bar a little bit higher for him than perhaps it should have been, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Um,
So I was the same. I had very high expectations. You'll remember of Jan Danda when he came in. He hasn't met them by any stretch. I've been bitterly disappointed by him. So to be honest, early on in the season, it was easy to make the excuse of, he's not being picked. And certainly this week was the first time that he had been picked to start 2 games in a row all season. But
mhm.
that's only an excuse that goes so far. He hasn't yet shown any of that sort of, what's the word that we're looking for here? He was signed to be a creative player and a player that we sorely needed, and he hasn't really shown any of that. He's kind of almost touched on it at times, but it's almost like you say, it feels like he's not quite up to the pace of the
Mhm.
press and the system that Critchley wants to play. And I think you pretty much summed it up immediately when you said that he was a victim of the system change. I feel like Jan Danda is a number 10, and he's quite one-dimensional in that sense. He is a guy who, if you put him in a central attacking midfield role and behind a striker with wingers flanking him, he is a guy who can certainly dictate play from there. But I don't feel like he's a guy that's going to be able to do the chase work. He's not the guy that you want on the wing out wide
Yeah.
doing the running. And I think that that's where he's fallen flat a bit.
Yeah, I think as well, like we kind of spoke a bit about it, and to me, it's that luxury player tag for me that I kind of look at, and I
Yes,
think in certain games and in certain scenarios you can have that, but in the games that matter and the games that you're chasing, the games that you have to work twice as hard, you need everybody to be on the same page. And I think again, I'm referencing Heidenheim and the players that were involved in that game. A large number of them ran themselves into the ground. Even Cammy Devlin, when he came on towards the end, he put in some shift while he was on the park.
yeah,
He did everything that
yeah,
Cammy would do. Blair Spittle, I think, is
yeah.
is somebody that we can kind of compare to Jan Danda in a sense because they both had similar roles in their previous clubs, sort of that number 10, maybe slightly
Yes.
wider sort of options. But
I
I think
What I would
Spittle's,
say is, yeah, you're going to take the words right out of my mouth. I feel like Spittle has certainly adapted far better than Jan Danda has.
yeah,
Spittle seems to have a hell of a lot more in his locker than we ever knew. Like I think he's ever been able to show at previous club because
yeah,
he's been at more defensive based teams where he was kind of like that outball, that sort of guy who they had as their kind of creative spark when they got the chances. But he has adapted so well to being able to play in a system where we have the majority of the ball, or where we're kind of always in the front foot trying to pin teams back. He's got way more in his locker than I feel like we noticed when he first came in. Whereas Danda, I
yeah.
feel, is becoming increasingly exposed as being slightly one dimensional in that sense, and that he is very much a guy that almost like Rudy Scatchel, he didn't do a lot of running. What Rudy
Mhm.
Scatchel did do was score from fucking anywhere. And Jan Danda
Yeah,
so far isn't doing that. And
yeah.
also, what Scatchel also did was score in the big games all the time. Like he always showed up in
Mhm.
the big games.
Yeah,
Danda is not doing that. He's just kind of running about
he's just there.
and sort of
He's just there.
occasionally picking out a pass, but it's often the wrong pass.
Hmm.
It's a
Yeah,
cry. It's I mean, I think it says it all when Benny Beningame against Johnston did what you would
yeah,
expect Jan Danda to be doing all by
yeah,
himself. It
yeah,
shows the
definitely.
confidence that we have in the attacking three or the attacking four when Benny Beningame is doing all that. It's
True. I think you make a good point about Spittle as well, though, and I think without going into a conversation about him because we could be here all night. I think with the Blair Spittle signing, I perhaps didn't really set a bar for him because I didn't really know too much and I didn't really know what to
yeah,
expect from him, and I was perhaps a little bit ignorant to what he would bring. But I
mhm,
have been massively, massively impressed, and I think Danda has that. He definitely has that ability, and he definitely has a spark. I know the Gorgie Ultras are singing songs about him having a spark, and I've yet to really see it. Um, he does give me Barry Mackay vibes in that sense, and it's not to
yeah,
compare the two players, but I do think again, like I say, there's luxury options, and I think Barry Mackay is a luxury option. Maybe not so much at the moment because he can't get a look in, which that in itself speaks volumes, and we'll probably talk about that in a later episode as we probably head
yeah.
towards a January transfer window. That might be something that we look at
And it's
then. But
entirely justified. I think to sum it up, it is entirely justified.
yeah, yeah. Listen, I don't want this to be taken as a dig at Yandanda. I don't want it to be taken as I don't rate him because I certainly do. But I just feel that, as I said, it's the system that's changed. Is he able to play that system? Can he be that pressing forward that plays off the wide to try and help? The one thing that I noticed in the Heidenheim game that was something that stuck out to me was Shanklin sort of doing the hold up play. And I think, we haven't even spoken about Shanklin's performance against Heidenheim, despite the fact he didn't get a goal. I actually thought it was one of his better games. The way he held the ball up, the way he won fouls for us in moments when we needed to sort of relieve the pressure a little bit, particularly the second half. The problem
Yeah.
Shanklin found against Heidenheim was there was nobody running beyond him to get onto the flick ons and to get onto the end of those things. And I think that was partially down to the
Yeah,
fact that Alan Forrest had run himself into the ground and just had nothing left. But also
absolutely. Yeah.
that Yandanda just wasn't there. And I think he came off at the right moment in the game. I think again, somebody commented that to myself, and it's right. He was one of the ones that definitely ran out of steam, ran out of legs, and I get it. He did a lot of chasing the ball, but it just wasn't quite enough. But I do hope that Yandanda can come good, and I believe that he will. I certainly believe that he will, but he might just need something to go in his favour, be it a goal or whatever. He might just need that little something just to get him going.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I do slightly digress from you there, and I sort of agree more along the lines with Hearts social media legend Pants Chaton when he says that he fears Zandanda might be too one dimensional, and I think more crucially too lightweight to be a great player for Hearts. You mentioned Shankland, and I feel like Shankland's physical play has never been more evident in its importance than it was in the Heidenheim game. He put that body of his about better than he has all year. And he, like you say, he won a lot of balls that way. He did the hold up play was fantastic. He just didn't have anything in terms of the help, and that's what Danda and also Vargas when he's playing are supposed to be. They're meant to be the guys that are making the run behind the defence and trying to get on the end of that. If Shanklin's not the one that's on the end of it, someone has to be. And
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
just we just don't have that at the moment. I don't
Yeah,
know what it
no,
is, if it's an inability to organise the attack or what I think it is, as we've already touched on, is just an inability to adapt so far. And it might come.
mhm.
Let's hope it does. I'm optimistic that he does still have um, a few kind of moments in him to come this year. The best is probably yet to come from Danda. It can't get much, not necessarily worse, but it's been sort of anonymous.
Yeah, I think just to sort of throw out another couple of comments before we move on, I think there's one or two I wanted to highlight.
Yep.
Graham, a friend of the podcast, Graham, he commented on the Twitter post that I put out about Danda. He started the season well, but recently he's looked off the pace. I think Danda needs to be playing in the number 10 role rather than being out wide, which is obviously kind of what we've touched on. As well as that, this kind of echoes your point about the physicality side of it. It's Hillbilly 1874 on Twitter says, I thought he was bullied beyond belief. We don't have any big physical players aside from Shankland. Aberdeen, Kelly, Celtic, and Rangers, they have some big units. And it's true. It is true. And it's the ugly side of the game, and it's not pretty, watching a big 6 foot forward or a big 6 foot 4 forward bullying people. But I said it before in the Kilmarnock game to use that as a reference point. They had Big
Yeah,
Vassell up front who caused us problems all day, and we seemed
yeah.
to struggle against big, strong forwards. And we don't want
I
to be
still look
big
like a
physical.
basketball centre, like a seven
Yeah,
foot two centre in basketball, just under the hoop in the paint, just bullying anybody that came anywhere near him.
yeah,
And
completely.
in this league, that is highly effective. If you've got a
Yeah,
big boy who can push people away, then you're gonna create chances that way in the
exactly.
SPL.
Exactly. And I think just the sort of one to kind of round it off before we kind of dive into the Rangers game and give our thoughts on that was Gorgie Opinion. He posted and said, like him a lot, needs time to adapt, needs time to adjust though. And you can see why he wasn't the first name on the team sheet for Naismith. Completely different game at Hearts than what he's done previously. 11 men behind the ball, breaching a wall. He'll come good, no doubt. So hopefully that optimism can be something that can echo, and hopefully he will burst into life and we'll see that spark that the Ultras are singing about, because I
Yeah.
think Jan Danda on his day can be a match winner. We just need to see that
Mm.
coming through from him.
Yeah,
But yeah.
yeah. I've seen it before in his previous club. He can be a match winner, and he can rise to the big occasions as well. I felt that Gorgie Opinion's follow-up comment was very interesting as well. He's been
Mm-hmm.
compared to Barry Mackay a lot in this thread, and Gorgie Opinion says comparing him to Mackay is harsh. Danda shows passion, takes players on, and looks to link up. Mackay often wonders about looking uninterested, and when he does get the ball, 9 times out of 10, it's a 5 yard pass backwards. It's hard to argue with the comment there in the last sentence about Mackay, but I do feel that Danda hasn't shown much more than that. To be honest, I don't feel like I have seen him take guys on. I certainly haven't seen him have much success in doing so. I do
Yeah.
agree with the commenters that say he's too lightweight. He hasn't adapted well to the role that he's been put in yet, and I don't know whether that'll
Mm-hmm.
come. It's probably the best is yet to come from Danda, but the ball's entirely in his court, really.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
I think.
if Critchley gets a chance to spend a bit more time on the training ground and less time on the actual pitch during games in the coming days, which we'll touch on after Rangers, I'm sure. Hopefully, that he can start to show the players and talk the players through where they're going wrong. And certainly, Danda feels like a guy that if we can identify where he's gone wrong, give him the chance to obviously rectify that. And there's every chance that he could.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think that kind of wraps it on Danda. I think it's very very early to write him off as a failed signing. I think that is incredibly early. I know there were some comments that suggested as such, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Aye,
go as
he's
far
he's
as
not
that.
he's not Mirsad Bislesia just yet. He's been a disappointment so far, but then again, who at Hearts hasn't really in the first
Yeah,
couple of months?
that's
And
it.
Banda just
That's
got
it.
into the team recently as well, so it's
Yeah, the the bar in terms of success is pretty low at the moment, as you say. So yeah, we'll cross our fingers and hope that Yandanda can spark something into life for himself
one
and
thing I
for
want to
us.
point out, and you'll I'm sure agree. Ever since Nathy Atkinson was dropped from the first team, Hearts have been pish.
Absolutely. Yep, yep. I'm calling it. And he's not. Alan Forrest hasn't played enough.
Well, he's been the best player on the park in a couple of times, when he has played.
Fair.
So
But yeah, we'll park that conversation there before I go on a Natty Atkinson love story, because it's in there.
miss him.
Trust me.
I do miss him.
Oh, I miss him. I miss him. But yeah, we then obviously travelled to Ibrox to take on Rangers. As I said at the start, a slightly off-color Rangers, certainly a Rangers that were there to be got at. I think in the lead up to the game, I felt a little bit more sort of. I was intrigued to see how we would play. I know obviously we've under Critchley so far we have played that sort of control in the game and trying to keep possession and pressing and making sure the opposition can't get out and can't create. But I wondered how that would translate to going to Ibrox, because we've seen Hearts teams of years gone by go to Ibrox and completely fall apart and the game plan goes out the window after 5 minutes, which ironically could have happened in the game at the weekend. But yeah, what were your sort of
Although,
initial? Yeah, well, what were your initial thoughts about the game in the lead up to it?
so Hearts went into this game in a hell of their own creation. Their shambolic form over the first quarter of this season means that we don't have the luxury of being able to go to Ibrox, take a doing, and be like, it's fine, we'll get the next one. We need to pick up as many points as we can in as many games as we can, and we do not have much margin for error, if any, left. And we're sitting 11th in the table when we should, at worst, be a top five team at this stage of the year. So we needed to get something from Ibrox.
Yeah,
Whether that's harsh or not, that's for other people to judge. But that is my personal opinion, and I'm going to stick to that. We needed to get something because Rangers have been. This is probably the worst Rangers side I can remember seeing since they were in the Championship. They had travelled to Olympiacos and had a pretty difficult game against Olympiacos as well. So they were dealing with a hell of a lot more travel fatigue than we would have been because we were just up the road in Edinburgh. We got a home
mm-hmm.
game. They got to sleep in their own beds the following night. Um, and Rangers didn't perform well on the day.
No,
Aside from the early goal, which was again, it was a calamitous defensive lapse. It was just a switching off by the defence that caused the goal. Aside from that, I wasn't in the least bit impressed by Rangers on Sunday.
nah, nah, I'm with you.
They were not a good. It was not a great performance from it. In the second half, they were abysmal. They could barely string two passes together. We should have
Yeah,
gotten something out of that. Like,
yeah,
if not a point, then we could have easily won it if we had hit the target. And it's almost like echoes of the Scottish Cup final 2 years ago.
yeah,
We took a team that had been taken to I think it was penalties that they lost that final on against Eintracht Frankfurt. They went to extra time and I
yes,
think they ended
yeah,
up
it
at
was.
penalties. So they were exhausted. They were blowing out their arse, and we had had plenty of rest ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to extra time and we lose 2-0 with two goals in extra time. I
Yeah.
went to that game. It was miserable. I was miserable the rest of that day. My poor mate Daniel, who is neither a Hearts fan nor a Rangers fan, was there with me, and I felt bad for him afterwards because he was like just having to put up with me and my miserable face all day. Um, but it was almost similar to that. We had zero shots on target that day. When you're up
Mm-hmm.
against a team like Rangers in a big game, whether it be a Scottish Cup final or a game where they are a wounded animal and you need to rack up as many points as you can as quickly as possible, you need to hit the target. There's no excuse for it.
Yeah, and it's not as if the chances that we had
And
weren't.
that's the long
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
that's the long and the short of it. And yeah, like you say, like we had some clear cut chances. We had
we
plenty of
did.
opportunities. to get something out of that game.
Yeah, yeah. I think you've kind of summed it up pretty much, ticked all the boxes of what I was going to pinpoint as well. I mean, the goal for Rangers was such a defensive calamity. Everybody just sort of switched off and just kind of let them play through, which is not what you want to see. And I'm sure Critchley would have given his defence both barrels at half time for that one, and rightly so. It's the sort of goal that I think Shanklin needs. It's that it was Tavernier
Yeah,
hitting the shot, and then it just sort of went in off of Dessers. I don't really think. I mean, he did know something about it, but I
yeah,
feel
yeah.
like I feel like Shanklin needs that kind of goal. Something just to go for him and just put it away.
Mm-hmm.
But the sort of
Use one
main
of
things,
use one of Ewan's favourite words, like a total shithouse goal.
yeah, completely. But that's the thing. And something like that could just
Yeah.
kick him on again. But who knows? I mean, we did have chances in the game. Vargas hitting the post, Benny having a chance towards the end. It was like you say, it was another instance of just missed opportunities and being
Mhm.
that one weak moment at the back that we give them a
Yes.
goal kind of decides the game. And I know,
Benny's yeah. Benny's chance for
no,
me was the one that killed me because like initially it looked like he had kind of skied it a bit, but then on the replays, and I remember the Hearts TV commentary team commenting on this, it was so close.
yeah,
It was like agonizingly close. The
yeah,
angle initially looked like he had skied it, but then when you got a look at the kind of
hmm
it was so close.
I
Just
know, I know.
unlucky at that point, but yeah, just by that point we should have had something anyway. But
Yeah, and then the only sort of point to kind of highlight about the game itself, and we've kind of rattled through it a bit, but it's because, let's be honest, there wasn't really a
there's not
great
much
deal
else to
to
talk about, really.
to
Yeah, it
discuss.
was a
The
poor game of football overall,
Yeah, the
and
the
certainly
point
a missed opportunity.
yeah, the one point at the end that I wanted to touch on because it was spoken about after was the potential handball right at the
Mm,
end when Gordon comes up for the corner. Now there is a handball, but it's not in the box, so I don't know where that leaves VAR and where that leaves the referee's decision and obviously the timing, etc. The ball does strike an arm. There is contact, whether it's intentional, whether it's meant. You can look into that what you will, but the referee doesn't make any indication that it's going to get checked and instead just blows for full time. That to me seemed a bit strange. I feel like if there's a decision to be made, it should have been made, despite the time left on the clock. But again, I don't know how these things work and how it all stacks up in that sense. But you could see the Hearts players were basically saying, "Are you not even going to check it? Like, are you not like that? That was a handball." And there were appeals. We wouldn't have got a penalty for it. It wasn't in the box. It was marginal, if anything. So I feel like kind of giving it any more conversation than that is maybe overstating the actual importance of that particular moment because
yeah,
we wouldn't have got anything out of that. And I think if the referee had turned around and said, yeah, VAR have checked in, it's not been given, there's nothing, then, that would have been fair enough, to be honest. But it did leave a bit of confusion towards the end, obviously, because it was, is the referee blown for full time or what's happening here? So that was kind of the only sort of point to make. But yeah, listen, I've seen us go to Ibrox and be a lot worse than that and come away with an absolute hammering. To go there and have 50-50 possession with them shows encouraging signs. And you're right in the sense of, we need to be going to these places and taking points, especially when Rangers haven't been great this season so far. It was an opportunity that was missed, similar to Heidenheim, like you say, another missed opportunity to get something. And, a few games we've had this season, there have been missed opportunities, but you just hope that it all clicks into place eventually and we start to motor. And I think kind of leading on to the final point of the podcast that we want to touch on. Obviously now we don't have a fixture for a couple of weeks due to the international break. Scotland in action. Craig Gordon and Lawrence Shankland called up for their country. One is an absolute no-brainer. The second, I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, we'll touch on that. I think you mentioned it earlier on about Critchley not having a lot of time to actually be with these players and work with them. That time is now. This international break is a big one, and I think
yes.
Critchley will be looking at this team. And I don't know about the injury situation with Callum Neuenhoff and Oda. I think those are the only two players aside from Gerald Taylor
So
that are injured.
pre the Heidenheim game, or was it pre? It was. I think it would have been either pre or post Heidenheim. Critchley was asked about both, both of them are back on the pitch and training, but Neuenhoff had only come back in the day before the Heidenheim game, so he is some way off. Oda is expected back quite a bit sooner. So it's potentially we're potentially looking at after the international break, potentially maybe a couple of weeks later than that. I don't imagine we'll see Neuenhoff until potentially New Year, even
Mm,
because he hasn't had a pre-season really,
true.
and you have to kind of take the kind of injuries that he's had pretty seriously in terms of building them
Yeah,
back up. Um, so the both are back on the pitch and training, but that's it's like early days, so they're
well,
pretty much in.
that's good. That's good news to hear about that.
Yeah.
I feel, and I had spoken again on the socials about it. I feel like Oda is a player that if Critchley can get him doing what he wants him to do, I think Oda could be a really,
Mhm.
really interesting player to watch in the second half of the season. And again, it's not just because I
Yes,
really enjoy
I
Oda.
think no, I think Oda could potentially be the key ultimately because he, I think, is going to thrive under Critchley's system. He's the kind of spark plug player that can come on with half an hour left, 20 minutes left, and really thrive in that system. Like
Yeah,
when Forrest's legs start to go or when Danda's legs start to go, you fire on Oda for 25 minutes. He can keep up that same intensity, and we then potentially you're looking at we might not be falling away from games after an hour or so if we've got that depth in the wide areas and attack. And Oda is also possessed of pace, unlike most of the
yeah,
side as well. He's probably the one winger we have left that's got any pace.
yeah.
So I think Oda is going to be a massive addition to the squad. It's going to be almost like a new signing when he comes
Yeah,
back in.
certainly. I certainly hope so, and I think we've seen against Rangers as well. Obviously, Musa came off the bench against Rangers, so there's Critchley
Yes,
spoke on
yeah,
him and said, he's trained well during the week, and that's the reward. If you train well, you get in the team, and fair play to him for that. Hopefully, we can see a little bit more
yeah,
of him because he just
yeah.
appears
Let
to be
me
in.
let me actually pose this to you, Alan. Do you feel that if he had been brought on earlier, that he could have potentially proven a game changer? Did you see enough from him that you might have thought, you know what, if he had gotten a bit more time on the pitch, he could have done something?
I liked some of his movement. I liked his sort of intent, and he looked to sort of be trying to sort of do something, but it just, I think, like you say, I just don't think he had enough time to do it. He's certainly a player that intrigues me a lot because we obviously brought him over. There was obviously a reason as to why.
Yeah.
We've surely not written him off without giving him any real game time to prove what he can do. And I say similar about Salazar. I think in as much as he's an Instagram model who likes to whinge when he's not in the first team, this is a player
You
that
know,
before,
he could get up the road.
well, before the thing is, before we were bringing him in, he was linked with Porto and he was linked with a lot of teams in
Hmm.
that side of things. So there's got to be
Yeah.
something in that, and there is that
I
element
think
of
it's a
you stick
mentality thing for him with Salazar. I think it's
completely,
mentality. I think if he had gone to a Porto, he would probably rise to that. I feel like he
yeah,
maybe thinks he's above Heart of Midlothian. And I think that
yeah.
is the biggest part of the problem.
Yeah, and I think you could perhaps, I mean, I'm not going to say you could put Musa in that category as well, because obviously I don't know him well enough to know what his character's like,
Mm.
but there maybe is an element of that. It's a big gamble for him to leave Sevilla. Obviously, it was the lower
Yeah.
levels of the Sevilla side, but to leave that out your comfort zone to come to a different country, it takes players different times to settle. Like we saw it with Oda when he first came in, and he wasn't really unleashed fully until later on in the season, and then it was like, where have you been hiding this guy?
Yeah. Tiger
It's
was
that
similar
side.
as well, like he really
Yeah,
didn't make an impact until the last couple of weeks of the season because he
exactly. Aye,
wasn't
and then
really
he
given that
left.
opportunity.
Aye,
Yeah,
and then he
that
was
season
sold.
that he scored against Rangers last year was just that's one of the best goals I've ever seen by a Hearts player at Tynecastle.
Oh, it was cracking. But
Just
yeah, and
the technique to hit that so it was the cleanest hit I've seen.
it
Anyway,
was very, very good. No, you're absolutely right. And then we sold him in the summer and didn't replace him with anyone.
yeah,
But yeah, that's another conversation to be had. I think, like I say, to kind of circle back to this international break, I think it's huge for Critchley because it's an opportunity for him to work with a majority of the squad. Okay, Gordon's away, Shanklin's away. I think it's Kenny Vargas and Kai Rose. I think they're the only other two I think that are away. Um, so there's more than enough bodies in the door to be able to put your ideas in and tell the players what you want them to do and train it. And it'll be very, very interesting to see. Obviously, the next game is Celtic at Tynecastle.
yeah.
So,
We're easing our way
it
back
does.
in after the international break.
Aye,
We are a winnable
I know.
tie against the unstoppable Scottish champions.
But maybe this is the optimist in me. Maybe this is the blind optimist. But being at Tynecastle, why not? Do you know what I mean? Let's see. And I think I'm not going to sit here and say we're going to get anything off of Celtic because, like you say, they are
Yeah.
a different animal this season. But I think that'll be a very very entertaining game of football if we play how we've
Yes.
been playing, and that is a positive. But yeah, listen, the international break is massive, and I think it'll for me it'll give Critchley that sort of not the last point, but I think it's the last international break of the year unless we've got another one, but I don't think we do. So
I
it
mean, we've
gives
only had half
Critchley
a dozen of them in the last couple of months. It's
honestly,
getting
listen,
ridiculous. It really is.
regular listeners and viewers of this podcast know
Yeah.
that you and I have an absolute disdain for international football, and
Yeah.
particularly
You
these
might as well just
these
switch it and
daft
play
breaks.
domestic friendlies once in a while and just send them away on international duty all year round because it's
Yeah,
getting outrageous. It
it's
ruins the
ridiculous.
season for me. I
Of
just
course
feel
it
like
does.
this is the time of
It,
year when we should be really getting stuck into the league
yeah,
and it's being interrupted yet again.
it is. It's that stop-start nature, and you can't sort of get any momentum going. But this is why I think Neil Critchley has a big opportunity, as I say, to get these players in, get them drilled, whether it be fitness related, whether it be tactical related. He's got an opportunity to get these guys in and go, right, do you know what? We've started well because, we can't deny it's been a decent start for Critchley in his time at Hearts thus far. Now's the time to try and kick that on again and say, right, do you know what? After the Celtic, Aberdeen, and then we play Dundee, after those games, just go. This is a run, and it'll give Critchley an opportunity to see the players and go, right, this is my last chance before January, really, where he will be. And I think the board will be. I'm not going to sit here and say we're going to be really, really busy in January because I don't think we will be. But the board will back him based off of what they've seen so far and based off of, I think, general fan engagement with it.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. Yeah, I think that we've seen enough from Critchley's era as manager so far to know that we are only a piece or two away from being right back where we probably should have been in the first place.
Yeah,
In performances, even though the results aren't necessarily going our way, we haven't had a performance under Critchley yet that I've thought was absolutely terrible, which was certainly the case earlier in the season.
yeah,
um, we can see what he's trying to implement, and you can see that the players are buying into that. It's just the factors that we've discussed a few times now that are kind of preventing us from being able to take that final step. And we are probably missing a piece or two in terms of pace, in terms of physicality. Um,
yeah,
and so, yeah, I feel like the board certainly will back him in that sense. Certainly think we need to bring in, excuse me, I think we need to try and bring in a striker in January, even if it is on loan. We just need a
yeah.
kind of big, who we could do with a non-WA type, just a big hoodie, that's
Bring
just
him
there
back.
to
Bring him back.
catch stray balls off the head. He's a bad example, actually.
It's a great
maybe
example.
more of a Zayfolk, but yeah, like we need a guy like that who's just going to body people.
Yeah,
Especially if we're playing a two, then that allows Shanklin to focus on finishing. Because I feel like
yeah,
Shanklin's trying to wear too many hats, and he's probably exhausted at this point because he doesn't have anyone behind him that can come in. So he
yeah,
probably feels a pressure, especially as captain, to play every minute of every game. Um, we need somebody to come in and take a bit of that workload off him so he can focus on getting back to doing what he does.
yeah, yeah. And
So yeah, I
obviously
would
there will
certainly
be.
imagine that we would bring someone in.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we're kind of looking ahead to January a little bit too early, but there will be obviously developments with Shanklin one way or the other, you would imagine, in January. So that may well be a situation that sorts itself out, or as I say, one way or the other, something will happen there. But yeah, I think we can round it off there. We've had an interesting conversation this evening, despite two rather disappointing games, as I said previously. But let us know what you think. In terms of our Conference League campaign, how do you feel it's going? Do you feel we'll get anything against Bruges and Copenhagen, or will it come down to the final game at Tynecastle and we'll do it in the most Hearts way possible? In terms of the Celtic game to look ahead to, folks, obviously, as I say, we are now entering an international break, so please stay tuned to our social channels. I'll more than likely be posting things, most likely on Facebook and potentially Blue Sky as well. As I say, we have launched it over there as well, so keep an eye on those for any sort of updates if there's any news that comes out of Tynecastle over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, for this evening, as I said, John, and as I always continue to say, your company is massively appreciated this evening, so thank you very much for joining me.
It's always a huge pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
Nah, it's all my pleasure is all mine, my man. Pleasure is all mine. Anyway, folks, you take care and have a good one. Bye for now.